Ladies and gentlemen, this is Call Center Week Online. I know. There's no way to compete with Vegas, where we'll be for our 16th annual Call Center Week in just 2 weeks. But Vegas has nothing on the value of our interactive virtual roundtable environment, and I'm confident that you'll see that over the next few days. In addition to featuring some great speakers, some speaking at Call Center Week, some not, this event is meant to completely mirror a live event experience and add some things that you can't get in the real world. There's a networking lounge where you'll be able to chat in real time with your fellow attendees. You can head to our virtual exhibit hall where you'll be able to interact with expert solution providers and get access to free content. Best of all, you won't have to carry anything around. You can download and view anything at your leisure. Each of our sessions is interactive. That means there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of our speakers. Most importantly, all are selected to illuminate contact center and customer experience topics and get you on the path to excellence. We begin with a pair of sessions. So later today at 1:45, and just note that's a slight adjustment on the time, we'll have a session on employee engagement and how that can drive customer satisfaction. Now, however, we start with a roundtable on contact center performance. In a world driven by numbers, performance is everything. It's how you prove your worth to your business and to your customers. It's how you earn money for future investments. Frankly, it's how you keep your job. Since it's so important, however, we really need to make sure we're doing it correctly. Too often, organizations rely passively on scores and conventions without thinking about what any of those mean. That's what we're trying to address today. We're trying to get to the bottom of the contact center performance question and understand, move beyond scores, move beyond passive assessments and best practices, and instead understand what do we have to do to perform in a way that drives results for our businesses and for our customers. That's the heart of contact center performance, and that's the heart of today's roundtable. As you can see, we have 3 very highly qualified panelists, all from diverse backgrounds with diverse experiences working with diverse clients. And they're going to really share their perspectives on contact center performance, speaking about it from different angles, speaking about it from different philosophies and different mentalities, but ultimately arriving at the same question. You need to focus on how to perform for your organization and your customers. You don't need to think about what other people say about your scores. You need to think about what your customers are getting, what your business is getting, and whether you're performing in the right way. To begin, I'd like to give each of our speakers a chance to introduce themselves. So first of all, Bill from DATAMARK, what are you all about? What's your take on the performance question? Why, what kind of perspective are you bringing today?
Fantastic. This is Bill Randag from DATAMARK. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. DATAMARK comes at it from a BPO perspective. We are a service provider. We are all about delivering for our customers. And so we're going to be talking about how we can work with our customers and with our employees to bridge that gap and make sure that we can deliver.
Perfect. Sounds great, and that's great. I think certainly a great perspective, one that can be related to by many of our attendees here. We also have another great thought leader joining us, and that's Stefan from Genesys. What are you all about? What's your take on contact center performance in today's age?
Hello all. So this is Stefan with Genesys. So my take on performance, Brian, is, and this is what we live and breathe at Genesys, is how do you enable the workforce and how do you manage performance in such a way that it helps to drive customer experiences? How do you manage and deliver on the customer journey? And how does that result in things like customer lifetime value? How does that result into driving business objectives like increased sales or conversion? How do you manage compliance? So that's really the angle we like to take from a Genesys perspective.
And last but certainly not least, another innovative perspective, and one should know it based on his job title, that certainly fits. So Brad from Calabrio, where do you stand on this issue? What perspective are you going to bring as we try to unlock this contact center performance question?
Great, thanks, and thanks for having me. It is absolutely an honor to be here. And at Calabrio, within the Innovation Center, what we really focus on is helping clients drive the most performance that they possibly can out of the resources that they have available to them, whether they're software, hardware, and human resources. And we're really talking about incremental innovation to drive huge improvements over your contact center, and that's what we like to focus on at Calabrio.
Well, I want to thank our speakers. I also want to thank DATAMARK, Genesys, and Calabrio for helping to power today's roundtable. Most importantly, I also want to thank all of you for your role, not only in attending and giving us an audience, but also this is interactive. We want to know your questions. We want to know what challenges you're facing when it comes to contact center performance. So throughout the discussion, feel free to submit questions using the console on your screen. Time permitting, we'll make sure that our speakers are able to answer those questions, where we provide that personalized experience. Anything we don't get to, you can definitely hit them up in their booths in the virtual exhibit hall, and I'm sure they'll also be happy to reach out to you personally to explore the answers to your questions and get you on the track to proper contact center performance. So to walk through today's agenda, we really have bracketed today's discussion into 5 areas. So first of all, and arguably the most important when you're really talking about contact center strategy, is the question of objectives. Before assessing performance, you need to know what constitutes good performance, what constitutes bad performance, not at the metric level, but at the high level, at the objective level, about understanding what the true objective of the contact center really is. We then want to move into metrics. Again, you need scores. You need numbers. That is how it is. It's a motivational tool. It's an assessment tool. You can't talk about performance without talking about measurement. But we want to rise above scores as sort of this passive concept, and we want to get them into an active place. How can you use them to drive performance? And how can you make sure what they're doing is actually beneficial to the organization in pursuit of those cornerstone objectives? Of course, let's face it. If this were an easy thing, if anyone could just flip a switch and perform better, you wouldn't be on this webinar. I wouldn't have a job, with Call Center IQ. There'd be no reason for Call Center Week. Everyone has challenges that they want to overcome, and today we're going to walk through a number of those challenges as they relate to agents and customers and the operation, and really understand how we can overcome those. And that sort of naturally ties into that 4th part, the action part. Bottlenecks exist, but they don't have to be crippling. They don't have to prevent performance from happening, and that's what we're going to discuss. And then finally, I don't want you to walk away from here getting a few ideas, implementing them, seeing a little bit of success, and then moving on. I want you to be able to sustain your growth. I want you to be able to say that good is never good enough. And for that to happen, we need to set a long-term strategy in place, and we'll definitely talk about that as we end today's roundtable. So to begin at the top of our agenda, we really want to start with what is the ultimate goal of the contact center. And that's really, Bill, I wanted to start with you. We know, sorry, my mistake. Wow, I apologize. Stefan, I want to start with you here, actually. So if we're talking about the ultimate objective for the contact center, what are organizations trying to achieve right now? What defines success?
So at Genesys, we think success can mean a lot of things. The classic example is it depends. But on a high level, I would say it's about adding value to the organization. How does the contact center help on delivering the bigger business objectives? Things like building customer loyalty. How does it support things like brand awareness, but also more typical KPIs like sales and other objectives. And the contact center needs to deliver on that brand promise. So on a high level, how does it support the overall business objective? On a more operational level, success sometimes looks different, and many contact centers look at it from the perspective of finding that right balance between how do we deliver on the customer experience that we want to deliver? How do we do that across all those different touch points and communication channels that exist today and that are emerging? And in relation to that, how do we do that within the budget that we actually assign to this part of the operation? So I would say those are elements of what success could look like.
That certainly makes sense, and I really appreciate that breakdown, because I think that obviously there's going to be a day-to-day element, and that's the contact center operational element. But then there's really that business side, that tying it in up the ladder, because those are the ones really, I think, making a lot of key decisions that will impact what you can do on a day-to-day basis. Now, Bill, we hear a lot of talk about customer experience continuing to gain priority within businesses. We hear a lot of emphasis that the contact center means more now than it ever has. Given that, how has the contact center role been changing? Has the objective changed over time? Is there, a different focus for what constitutes success and failure when it comes to today's contact center versus maybe what we encountered in the past?
Great question. We're in a very dynamic environment. for two reasons. Number one, our clients, the end customers, their demands are changing. The way that they want to be touched and the way that they want to reach out is changing. And then at the flip side, we manage a lot of people. And, people always, there's an element of change in there with the people. And so I think that in a lot of ways, the role of the contact centers is very similar to what it's been in the past. Obviously, on a outbound sales contact center, you're really looking to drive revenue and increase customers and pick up market share. And then on the flip side, you've got the inbound customer calls, and you're really trying to drive your CSAT scores and improve customer satisfaction. And so in a lot of ways, I think that what we're doing today is very similar to what we've done in the past. However, there's also some rapid changes taking place that are really forcing us to act different and forcing us to take a different role. And if you just think about the technology, the cloud has enabled us to do things that we never could have done in the past in multiple locations. The price points have come way down. If you think about the way that customers want to be spoken to, I mean, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and email, there's a new demand being placed upon us where, just 10 years ago, the call center was everything. That was the touch point. And today we're seeing that expand into so many different touch points that what we have to recognize is when we get a phone call, it's very likely, in fact probable, that the customer attempted to resolve their issue through one of those other channels. And we just have to recognize that we're still that place where they expect that solution to get taken care of, but we're also that place where the data can be gathered, the analytics can be gathered so that we can collect information to help speed up or fix all those other touch points that the new customers might be touching.
Bill, I'm glad that you brought up, I think, a lot of the changes and how that's actually made, I think, a more all-encompassing thing, that it's not just the call center, it's the contact center. Because at surface level, that seems to be proposing a lot of challenges in front of organizations, that they have to become these various different things that customers are now expecting on a day-to-day basis. And I think that obviously on a shallow basis, on a superficial level, creates a concern about rising costs and rising challenges. And there may be this sense that, historically, if the idea is to keep budget low, to keep costs low, how can a business really allow its contact center to, I think, adapt in all these different ways? So that sort of segues into the question I have for you, Brad, and that is this idea of, there's often been this idea that there's the business side, there's the business objective, and then there's the customer objective. There's what the customer wants, and you sort of have to meet them in the middle. You sort of have to strike a balance. However, there's another school of thought that says what's good for the customer is what's good for the business, and that basically the objectives are aligned, so you shouldn't be compromising or sacrificing anything, but you should be sort of looking at them in tandem, and that's the optimal way to go about it. What do you see as the right answer? Is there a clash between what success means from a performance standpoint for the customer and for a business, or can they really be the exact same outcome, and therefore you can put all the effort into one objective?
Right, and the key to understanding this question and understanding what we really need to focus on is the first thing that we really need to understand is, as Bill mentioned, that the things that a contact center is designed to provide haven't overall changed that much over the last since the time that contact centers have begun to exist. And those goals are, you kind of hear some people referring to them as the 5 pillars of what a contact center is supposed to do, is that to provide outstanding customer service, increasing sales, minimizing operating costs, decreasing your costs of doing business, improving market awareness, and gathering metrics to help drive business. Those are kind of the 5 pillars of managing a contact center, and those really haven't changed. But what's really happened over the last few years, and maybe over the last 10, 15 years actually, is there's been a big shift in focus to focus on the pillar which is providing outstanding customer service or driving a better customer experience. And rightly so, because really customer experience and customer service is the primary differentiator that we have in this day and age. That's a very fast-moving world with lots of different competitors, and how we can set ourselves apart is by providing providing outstanding customer service to our customers every single time we deal with them. So it's critically important, and that does in some cases bring up a clash between the people that are trying to really service their customers in the most outstanding way that they can, and those people that are trying to run a business and they're trying to minimize their operating costs and increase sales and those types of things. The reality is I don't necessarily think those things clash, because that first pillar, focusing on your customer experience, focusing on your customer service, is what leads to increased sales. It's what leads to marketing awareness and marketing brand awareness, and it's what leads you to drive those analytics to get that information into your contact center. So I don't necessarily think that there is a clash, but we do have to focus on balancing those things, because we do, of course, there is the operating cost thing we need to always take into consideration, and so there is some bit of a balancing act that we have to focus on, but really that first pillar, providing outstanding customer service, really needs to be our focus and does absolutely drive success through the rest of the contact center.
All right, so now that we've sort of, I think, established the context of the contact center, it's time to transition into actually measuring whether we're achieving those objectives. So, Bill, again, now that we sort of have a sense of what matters, how do you make that transition? How do you go to metrics at this point? How do you let those objectives become things that you can quantify?
Well, I love what Brad said, and one of the things that if you have kids, you recognize that your kids don't always know what's good for them. They might know what they want, but they might not know what's good for them. And I think that one of the challenges that we have is there's a lot of demands on us to provide service through a bunch of different channels, and some of those channels just don't work for the service that needs to be provided through that customer center. And so I think when you look at the metrics, they're a good tool for us to use to really discern the right channel for the right solution. And if there's been a lot of talk recently, we've probably all heard about the effortless contact center. And I'll come back to that, because I think that customer satisfaction, the various CSAT, ways to measure how satisfied the customer is after the engagement, are still very important, and they're going to continue to be very important. But this effortless metric, I think that there's a secret sauce in there, because one of the things that we have to recognize is we could nail every metric. We could have, we could answer the phone on time. We could solve it in one call. We could have great call quality and tone and ask all the right questions. But the customer could still be very unhappy because they tried to email me, they tried to chat, they tried to look it up on the website, they couldn't get it all done, and then they contacted me. And so I could still meet all the metrics of the call center and still have a very unhappy customer. And that's not going to drive loyalty, and that's not going to drive increased sales. So as we, in this new age where we're looking at such a wide variety of contact points, there's a challenge for us that we need to make sure we don't bring the Facebook channel to being an active channel until we're sure that the customer is going to be able to get everything they need through that channel. Bringing it online prematurely in order to give the customer what they want is going to backfire on you, because if they can't actually solve their problem in that channel, then they're not going to be really happy. So we have to make sure that before we bring these channels up and running, that they're actually well thought out. The customer can get all the way through the channel and resolve whatever their issue is. So if you think about the metrics for that, we need to be bringing metrics to the forefront of what is the customer effort, so that we're not just looking at, did we do a good job on our piece on the phone, but as a whole, are we bringing the solution to the customers that they need in a way that they can get what they need very quickly with as little channel switching as possible?
So I think I want to, from that point, I think set a good stage. But Brad, I'm going to make life difficult for you right now, because I know that a lot of times when we have these conversations, we tend to want to say that it depends on the organization. It depends on what you're facing. But given, I think, what Bill said about really looking at that effortless experience and starting to look at what really is mattering for today's customers, do you, Brad, see any must-have metrics, or the things that you absolutely have to be measuring because you're a contact center and because you service customers? And alternatively, are there things that maybe you definitely don't have to measure in today's day and age?
Yeah, that is a great question. That is a great question, and it's one that we deal with on a pretty regular basis. What metrics should we be looking at? What's important and what's not? And to a certain extent, as much as we don't want this to be the answer is always going to be, to a certain extent. It does depend a little bit on the industry that you're in, but and what type of a contact center and what type of service you're providing to your customers. But at the end of the day, again, what we're driving towards is the same in every contact center. We're driving to have satisfied customers that come back to us and continue to buy from us and support our organization. So because the goals for contact centers are the same, there are some metrics that we really should universally be focusing on. And those metrics that we should be focusing on are the ones that tie directly to the customer experience and to what we feel are important factors within our customer engagement. So, just a couple of examples, and again, it does depend a little bit, but I think there's a couple of universal ones, like first contact resolution. And to Bill's point, we're not necessarily talking about first call resolution, first contact resolution. Were they able to get their issue resolved the first time they got through to us, regardless of the channel that they were looking at? The other metric that I like to look at that I feel is very helpful is escalation management. How often are people needing to escalate up to another level of support? And those two things, I think, speak directly to customer experience, because one of the primary things that can be detrimental to a customer experience is customers that feel that their time is not being used effectively and are having their time wasted. And having to call a contact center multiple times and having to be escalated to a supervisor, these are time-consuming things that lead directly to poor customer satisfaction scores. So those are a couple that I think are universal across all contact centers. As far as metrics that have no relevance, I don't think there are any metrics that have no relevance. Every metric is going to have relevance to some aspect of running the contact center. But there are metrics that are less important. And those, again, going back to the first point, are going to be metrics that don't have a direct relationship to the customer experience and to customer service. They might be things that we're focused on as a business, things like occupancy, for example. It's an important metric from the perspective of running a business, but it doesn't necessarily have a direct relation to occupancy. Not the kind of a fishy topic, because obviously occupancy can have impacts on customer service if your agents are overworked and those types of things. But it as a general rule, people have a number in mind that they're trying to aim for, and it might not have a relationship to customer service. So a long-winded answer, but what I always suggest to people is that when you're looking at metrics to focus on, focus on the metrics that you feel are going to have a direct relation to customer experience, and then experiment. Use the scientific method. Implement changes that you think are going to have an impact on that metric, measure the change in that metric, and then correlate that to customer satisfaction and customer experience. If you don't see a correlation between those two things, that metric is probably not that important to you.
Again, Stefan, I think Brad brought up the fact that there's going to be organizational disparity in metrics. But even within an organization, different metrics can mean different things to different stakeholders within the business. An agent may see something like average handle time in a completely different light than his boss may, and that may be completely different than what the C-level is seeing, and of course the customer then looks at it from a completely different perspective as well. So when you have all these different people interpreting the same metric in different ways, how do you possibly create a cohesive performance management strategy, knowing that you really have to have everyone united behind what matters and what doesn't to the business?
That's a great topic. So in my mind, it all starts right when that performance management framework is defined. So you start by defining what the business objective is. And next step is really to understand, so what are the key stakeholders and what KPIs do we actually assign to those stakeholders? So I think there's different levels in the organization that probably they all care about the whole set of KPIs, but they probably are more affected or interested or have more influence on certain KPIs. So it depends on the operational level, I would say. So in my mind, the stakeholders should be able to influence the KPI right through the right action and through the right behavior. And it's really critical to understand that to make everybody understand what the context is of that KPI. Why is it important to the business? How does it relate directly to that bigger business objective, whether that's customer experience, whether it's sales, whether it's driving down cost? I think understanding that really helps you to drive the right behavior behind that KPI. What's the role of each stakeholder? So critically important to educate specifically the workforce on those KPIs and tell them that the KPI itself is not the goal. It's what drives the KPI. And as long as these stakeholders understand this and they do not longer take shortcuts to actually, I always call it polish up the KPI, you're on your path to do the right thing. And additionally, I think the hardest thing for most contact centers is to let go of traditional metrics. You know, this industry has been around for a long time, and I think many operations still measure a certain set of metrics because that's the way they've been doing it, or that's what their applications and systems can actually deliver. So you have to ensure that these metrics are used for its intended purpose. So for example, measuring, like you said, volume and average handle time is great for workforce planning, but it's really not a good thing to measure individual agents on a real-time basis. For example, when I was a call center agent 20 years ago, there was nothing more frustrating than a supervisor jumping up and down right next to me saying service levels under pressure. You can do that once or twice, but at the end of the day, that's really not the problem of the agent. So I think having a good understanding within the KPI framework of who's responsible for what and how can we influence things and make conscious decisions on what do you communicate in terms of KPIs to who is critical. Every time I walk into a contact center operation and I see the wall of KPIs where every possible KPI is put on a wall or a wall display, I always ask the question, who looks at this and do they understand what it means? And honestly, most of the time people say nobody looks at it and we don't really understand what it means. That's a clear indication there's something wrong with the performance management framework.
Speaking of something wrong, I right now want to focus on challenges because, again, I think a lot of what you guys have said, while certainly valid and illuminating and on point, I doubt there's going to be much disagreement, or I doubt that there's going to be this idea that, oh my God, I can't believe somebody said that about the contact center. I think most of those listening are generally on the same page, and yet many of those listening are not able to just flip a switch, as I mentioned, and immediately have a well-oiled contact center. So challenges definitely exist, and I really want to unpack what some of those challenges are. So first of all, Bill, getting at one of the more, general things that we commonly associate with the contact center, and that is this idea of agent turnover and agent attrition, that you don't always have a steady workforce, that you have constant switches in the employment pool. Can that really have an impact on performance if you're really trying to hammer home this performance culture, but you don't have a consistent group of agents with whom to actually carry out that performance?
Absolutely. From earlier when we were asking what was the most important metric, well, I can tell you from a provider metric or from any call center manager out there, they're going to tell you the most important metric is turnover. And it's not commonly reported as a KPI, but it is for us. And we've been in the BPO business now for 25 years, and not just in the call center, but in all other facets of BPO, turnover is the most important metric. And we've been, for the last 30 minutes, we've been talking about how complicated call centers in particular are. What's the right metric? Well, it depends. Which one's the most important metric? It depends. Are there any of them that don't matter at all? No, they all have some sort of meaning. Well, it takes a long time to really get to comprehend exactly what your job is as an agent. A lot of times these guys are, you know, right out of high school or maybe going into college or part-time between, and the concept of what they're supporting is not something that's quickly grasped. It's something that comes over time. And being able to balance, for example, you know, what's more important, average handle time or customer satisfaction? Well, it depends. It's different situations. And they cut their teeth in the call center, and they learn the importance of all these metrics, when they're important, when they're not important. They learn tricks of the trade. They learn when to escalate, when not to escalate, what questions to ask. That's something that comes with time and with seasoning, and you just simply cannot underestimate the value of a seasoned contact center person, whether that's email or chat or most importantly on the phone. So at the end of the day, from our perspective, absolutely turnover is the most important metric because it drives everything else. Even when you think of workforce planning, having a brand new person in charge of workforce is not as good as having somebody that's been doing it for 3 years. So in all of the aspects, the tricks of the trade are learned. So the question really is, okay, and I don't think anybody would disagree of how important turnover is. So really the question is, well, how do we drive that turnover down? Well, like we've been talking about metrics, what gets measured is what gets focused on. We look at it every single month from every single customer and every single site. We're constantly looking at what we can do to drive that down. And there's a couple of secrets that we found over time. One is strategically locating your call center in an area that has the culture fit to the type of call center you have. You know, some cultures are more gregarious, some cultures are more serious, some cultures are more technical. So locating your call center in an area that has that culture fit can be very, very important. And I think that one of our secrets to success is just creating a family environment. And really what that speaks to is you got to care about your agents. You got to care about what's important to them. You got to care about their families and their schedules and flexibility for them. Because if you can bring them into an environment with a buddy system, that somebody's that's going to take them by the hand and really help them to understand what this particular call center is all about, you increase your chances of getting them to stay through that all critical 60 to 90 days. In those first 60 to 90 days, a lot of people get scared off, but most people that can make it beyond those 60 to 90 days really have that high probability of really staying and really making it work and really being successful. And so being able to test for the right skills, locate your call center in the right location for a good cultural fit, and then really take them by the hand to walk them through those first 60 to 90 days will dramatically reduce your turnover, which will dramatically increase all these other metrics that we've been talking about that are so important.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, that sort of ties into what I wanted to ask Brad. So you have your agents in place, you know, the same agents there year to year. That doesn't necessarily mean they're engaged. And when we talk about this idea of happy agents equals happy customers, we often talk about the idea that obviously you need to go beyond just keeping the same people there. You need to really, I think, optimize what they're doing. Bill started to touch on that, but Brad, I really want to turn to you as well. You know, to what extent are disengaged agents, you know, not only potentially at risk of leaving the company, but also adversely impacting performance?
Yeah, that's, and again, a great question, and Bill did a really great job of explaining how, you know, again, unhappy agents can directly impact your business because they're the folks that are obviously they're going to leave, right? And so turnover has a huge impact on just the overall health of your business because obviously there's tremendous cost associated with that. But in addition, having new agents that you're constantly churning through, you know, it's going to obviously have an impact on your performance. So what we've really taken a very hard look at this particular topic and in finding ways to engage agents better within the contact center through concepts like things like gamification, which is a concept that I think a lot of people kind of rolled their eyes a little bit when this idea was first floating around there a couple of years ago. But we've seen the results in the real world when you can actually make agents engaged in their own performance management by turning it into a game. It causes an entire different mindset. It's one thing for me as a supervisor to say, your customer service, your quality scores this month were 80% and we want to get you to an 85% next month. It's a whole other thing for me as an agent to sit down at my desk and say, oh, I'm a level 3 in customer service this month, and that guy sitting next to me, he's a level 4. I need to catch up to that guy. Because I'm better than him, right? So you just bring in that competitive nature. We've also seen a concept that we introduced at Calabrio called dynamic scheduling, which really allows agents to build their own schedule as opposed to being tied to a traditional shift bid or a traditional 9-to-5 shift. Allowing agents to actually build their own schedule around their lives to fit what works for them has caused tremendous improvements in agent turnover just from allowing people to kind of fit their schedules to their lives. And what does that also lead to, right? So when we're leading agents, when we have happy agents, those agents love coming to work every day. Their job is not a slog that they need to get through. It's an enjoyable part of their life, and therefore when they come in, they're automatically offering better customer service. I refer to it as the Magic Kingdom syndrome. When you have employees that are happy to be where they are, and if anybody's been to one of the major theme parks in this country, they'll know that it makes a huge difference. Having people that are there that want to make your experience special makes you want to do business and spend money there. And it's really all about agent performance and agent satisfaction. It's the quickest way to improve customer satisfaction.
Now there's I think the cultural side, and that's sort of what we've addressed so far. But Stefan, there's also the logistics side. Making sure that you're managing your workforce, that you're optimizing scheduling and optimizing the roles that they're fulfilling within the organization. To what extent have you seen workforce management gaps manifesting as performance challenges?
So we've seen that where workforce management really can get sort of in the way of optimal productivity, and to me, it's in workforce management. It shouldn't get in the way, of course, and it should be used as a tool to balance out all these different objectives like efficiency and quality and budget, and it should be used to enable the workforce rather than simply schedule and manage SLA only. I think the tool is only as good as it is in the hands of the person that has the skills, and we just talked about. Churn of employees and also the examples given of churn in workforce planning. I think a good workforce planner understands how to find that balance. And we also talked a little bit about how modern workforce management tools allow agents to influence their schedule. Things like shift bidding and swapping of a shift, building your own schedule, requesting time off, but also some things that may seem far sought, like sharing transportation, making it easier for people to come to work, maybe even save a bit of money on fuel costs, that sort of thing that may sound a little bit odd when you think about it, but can make a big difference for the employee. So when it's used the wrong way, workforce management can deliver optimal performance for a while, but it will go at the expense longer term of other things like employee engagement, morale, and then it will negatively impact churn, and then in the longer run, that will definitely impact customer satisfaction the wrong way.
So that sort of addresses some of the internal focuses, the way agents sort of intersect and cause problems towards performance, but also I think we provide some solutions. But now I want to move into the customer element, because if we're really saying that what ultimately matters is whether you're impacting the customer experience positively, then you really have to know what the customer wants. Now, Brad, do you feel that we do know what customers want? You know, are organizations doing enough right now to really understand what the external demand is? Because without knowing that, they really have no chance of aligning their internal practices.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. In Calabrio, when we refer to this as the understanding the voice of the customer, understanding what your customers are saying through, regardless of the channel that they are working in, and the answer is, are people doing enough to really understand that and understanding what their customers want? In most cases they are not. One of the things that we see is, and I think again Bill touched on this earlier when he's talking about the hidden metrics, right? Where a customer, we've introduced a media channel for a customer, and not really even understood how customers want to use that channel, whether they want to use that channel, whether it's and what the goals of that particular channel are. So understanding the voice of the customer is what's going to allow you to do that. And there's a number of different ways to do that. The traditional customer surveys are a very effective way of doing that, of understanding that. But you really need to look at your customer surveys holistically, and not just do post-call surveys that a customer allows you, that you allow a customer to opt into, but actually following up with a customer post-call, calling back a day or two after the service, and getting a survey at that point is a lot of times a very helpful way to get that customer satisfaction information. And again, don't just focus on the channel that they were talking about. Ask them about their total customer experience with your organization. In addition to that, there are of course software tools out there. Calabrio is an analytics company. We offer an analytics solution, and it's really the most direct way to unlock the voice of the customer, really having that ability to dive into audio calls, desktop interactions, email, text, and being able to pull that language out directly to understand what your customers are responding to, what they're not responding to, what's working and what isn't, is tremendously valuable. And I really don't see enough people embracing those types of tools. They'll focus on their standard, customer service surveys and quality programs without really going and digging in and finding out if they're asking the right questions. So by understanding the voice of the customer, it allows you to do that.
Stefan, now another area we talk about a lot is this idea of the relationship between brand and customer versus the transaction between brand and customer. Now, everyone says they want a relationship, but a lot of times performance is really managed against the transaction. We look at, was the call successful? Do you see that transactional mindset as having a negative impact on performance? And is it something that is worth really addressing for those listening?
I think it is. And I agree. I think sometimes there's an impact on businesses on how they answer that question. So I think it helps employees to understand what to focus on and what metrics are important. I think it also helps them to move away from a culture of, for example, helping as many customers as I can versus helping the customer the best way I can. So having this relationship-oriented approach can have a clear impact on performance and the way performance is measured. And I think it should have an impact. I think you cannot say we are looking for driving a customer experience. We're all for building customer relationships and driving customer lifetime value without revisiting your KPI framework. So it has a clear impact on that framework. It has a clear impact on your coaching techniques, and it even has impact on what type of agent profile you're hiring against, for example. So when managing the customer experience, you look at the longer-term impact versus driving short-term things like average handle time, for example. So fully agree that there's a big impact on the way that organizations need to look at the performance question in the bigger scheme of things. But I think that's a really good thing. I think the industry does need to change towards managing customer lifetime value. We talked about employee churn. I think critically important is looking at customer churn, and it's typically not a metric that the contact center looks at. It's looked at a higher level. But I do think contact centers do need to look at what is their part in managing that customer journey, managing that customer experience, and how does it help the organization as a whole to get more lifetime and therefore more economic value out of those customer relationships.
And then, Bill, sort of putting that all together, this customer-first mindset, at what point does that translate into the way agents perform? I mean, do they have to all be bought into this idea of customer centricity? Do they have to see themselves as part of a journey? Do they have to feel as if they're incentivized and managed based on their customer-first mindset in order to really perform optimally?
That's a great question. I got to throw in a little monkey wrench here. Who's the customer? Is the customer really the person on the phone, or is the customer really the person that's telling you how to manage the person on the phone? If you walk to a call center manager and you talk to them about the customer, you might get the deer in the headlights look for a minute. Certainly in our business, we're in between the company and the customer on the phone, and so we've got this two customers. So in fact, over time, what we see is we become the voice of the customer for our clients that are outsourcing the call center. So there's kind of in this dynamic where the cloud solution is allowing outsourcing to be more prolific, especially in multiple locations at the same time. There's this new dynamic that's developing because there's really two customers, and the outsourcing provider is really the voice of both. And so to your question, yeah, absolutely, it's very important for the agent, and even a little bit more complicated because they have to realize it's important for us to really be an extension of our customers. We have to adopt their culture. We have to answer questions the way they expect to have them answered. But over time, as the environment changes, we become the voice of the customer. We've got to be able to gather those stats and ideas and feelings of the end customers that are actually on the phone and be able to translate it back to the customers, because over time our customers become very dependent on us giving them the voice of their customers. I'm throwing that word in here, customer, a lot. Hopefully it's not too confusing, but you can see that as this channels begin to proliferate and there's many more contact points, some of those different contact points aren't even handled in the same contact center. You could have Facebook on the East Coast and Twitter on the West Coast and so out of India. And so it becomes very important for us to be not just an extension of our customers from a cultural standpoint and really ingraining that into our operators, but at the same time we've got to teach them to be gathering that information in a way that's easily shareable back upstream to what we would call our customers, so that we can really help them drive business, so that they can innovate, so that they can continually be improving how they interact with their customers.
One of the reasons why I like these speakers right now is that as they were addressing the challenges, they really started to pepper in some solutions for all those. And so I don't think we need to devote time to the short-term solutions. What I do think I want to focus on, though, is the long-term. Once you start to implement some of the ideas that they spoke about, what can you do to sustain those results, sustain that improvement, and keep improving moving forward? So again, I'm going to keep it right now with Bill. I'm going to ask you, how do you do that? You mentioned a lot of ideas for reducing turnover, for improving the way you look at customers, for improving the agent environment. But once you start to make these changes, once you start to see a little bit of success, how do you make more? And how do you keep your business behind the idea that what's good right now is not good enough for the long term?
Well, the easy answer is that continuous improvement is not a goal, it's a culture. We talked before and we said that whatever gets measured is what gets looked at. Well, continuous improvement it's not something where you focus on average handle time. Continuous improvement is when you're looking holistically at, is there new technology? Should I move this from India to Mexico? Should I add in bilingual? Should we use more analytics? Which metric is the lowest? It's much more holistic. When you think of continuous improvement, you've got to be looking at the entire enchilada, so to speak. And so the culture is what drives that. For us, what it really means is we've got to be really honest with our customers, whether they want to hear the truth or not. A lot of times people fall in love with their solutions or fall in love with their software or their hardware or their offshore locations, and we've got to really be honest with them because, you know, that's where wisdom comes from. You know, if you're relying on what got you here, it's not going to get you there. From the flip side, I think when people are looking for continuous improvement, they need to be looking for companies that have embodied that as a culture. Like, you don't want to go pick the shiniest solution off the shelf. You want to talk to their customers and find out how often are they upgrading, how often are they bringing new ideas. You want to look for a culture of continuous improvement because it's not something that can be sustained in the long term. If it's not part of the culture, then you'll just get a flash in the pan. It'll be one and done.
Definitely. Now, you know, another area, I think, as you start to make these cultural improvements and as you really start to unpack what you want, what happens when the framework changes? You know, Brad, what happens when customers decide they want different things? We've already seen that with multi-channel. You know, moving forward, who knows what's going to happen? What happens when agents require a different environment in which to commit their loyalty and, you know, not leave for greener pastures? What happens when business objectives change? You know, how, if you're making all this investment into creating this culture, how do you make sure that it's also versatile and robust enough to change as the conditions change?
And I think the answer to that question is really just contained within the question itself, and that is when you make innovation and improvement, when you make it cultural and you make it a part of your contact center, then the mindset of the organization changes and it becomes an organization that's continuously looking for improvements and continuously analyzing their objectives and finding ways to improve them, because that's really what it boils down to, is we need to be constantly looking at things through the filter of what our customers want, because as you mentioned, the landscape of the contact center world is changing very quickly. Phone is not going to be king for that much longer, so other channels are taking over. There's different ways of doing things, and if we're not looking at our corporate objectives, at the goals for the contact center, and making sure that those are in alignment with the new channels, the new processes, the new demands that our customers may have, we're going to be falling behind. But if we can make these things cultural, then we don't end up in a situation where we have processes in place where we don't really know where they came from. I think Stefan talked about this earlier. One of the phrases I hate more than anything when I go into a contact center, when I ask them about a process or something that they have in place, we've always done it this way. It's the worst answer that you can give as far as why you have a process in place. If there are processes that you have in place within your organization that don't have a specific reason for being, then those processes are really just a barrier to both your agents and your customers to do business with you. And being able to look at those things and look at incremental innovation, small improvements that can affect big change over time. We're not talking about, you know, throwing the baby out with the bathwater and changing everything. Small incremental improvements can drive big changes, and if you make it cultural and a part of your organization, you will be successful as customer expectations change.
Now, Stefan, what about at the high level? So there's going to be operational changes, and also there's going to be technology changes that I think need to be made. Historically, these are areas where there's a lot of inertia. I can't tell you how many times I hear complaints that, you know, we are reliant on legacy systems, or reliant, you know, our technology isn't integrated properly, or we can't adapt. You know, how do you, I think, overcome that? Because part of being versatile and robust is going to also mean that you really need to carry that through to your technology, that you need to be able to make system changes as well. So how can you start to, I think, align your operations and your systems with this need for constant change and constant alignment with what customers want?
That's a great question, and I think the key to this is openness. I think the key is to look at performance of the workforce, but also the outcome and the metrics of the customer experience in the right context. So on a systems level, that means that you need to be able to connect the dots of what are usually separate sources of information and really look at it holistically. How do you turn all these silos of information, whether you are using a point solution for your contact center to manage telephone calls, whether that's you're managing social interactions from a different cloud solution maybe, or you have a different dedicated chat solution. How do you get all of that information? How do you apply a single platform approach to really understand what happens across that customer experience, but also you have an understanding of what performance means across the workforce? So if you have that single platform approach, it also allows you to build this single data warehouse across all the different parts of the customer experience, all the different touch points, all the different locations, all the different technologies, the different communication channels. And then if you have that in place, what that allows you to do is enable what we call correlation analysis. So in simple words, really look at the correlation between those different KPIs and really understand what actually drives performance. So for example, do agents that really score high on training for sales, do they actually really sell more? Can you really see the correlation between those two events or not? And at Genesys, we've seen examples where employees that had really great scores in the quality management scorecard on sales actually weren't selling more at all. Does good product knowledge really drive more customer satisfaction or not? That's really the key question. So another key area, I guess, is also on the systems level is contextual analytics. We talked about this before. Looking at operational performance and those metrics is that's one part of the equation. The other part is really to analyze the context of each interaction. What was really said to the customer? How did the agent really behave? How often does the agent put the customer on hold, or maybe is silent for longer periods of time? And how does that correlate to some of those key performance metrics? So to me, the ability to really drive sustained performance or continuous improvement, as it was also called, really is built on a lot of things, but one of them is the ability to see the correlation in all that data.
Now, we do have a few minutes for audience questions. Obviously, again, all of our sponsors here will have booths in our exhibit hall, and that starts in just a few minutes, so certainly a chance to follow up. But to kick off the questions, so Bill, one of the questions we had concerns the disparity between metrics for different levels on the hierarchy, where you may have managers being paid differently than agents, being measured differently than agents, and so it creates a conflict. So how do you sort of overcome that when different people in the same function are being advised to perform differently, and yet ultimately you can only have one outcome for the customer?
Isn't that silly? Yeah, it's funny, but just because we're running a company doesn't mean we're the smartest people on earth. I think that I always tell my guys, hey, if I'm being stupid, please tell me now. Don't let me go outside and be stupid. I'd rather be stupid inside and you tell me. So the advice I would give is call it like it is. Just speak up. Tell the truth, but do it with dignity and respect. Go let people know what you're seeing, because it's quite possible that it's just simply overlooked. And I would say, I tell all my guys, I want you to be honest, but don't just come to me with problems. Come to me with solutions. I want you to be honest about what you see. I want you to call a spade and let me know what it is that we need to fix, but come with a solution. So look at those metrics in your particular industry and in your particular call center and figure out the solution. What should it be that's going to give people the incentive to drive those key metrics for the business that don't function at cross purposes?
Definitely. Now, Stefan, I have a question here concerning, I think, right now the idea between metrics and actually improvement. So you have scores on the one hand, that metrics right tell you what you're doing, but how do you, I think, learn what you need to do?
So a lot of it is to do with carefully understanding and seeing the correlation, as I talked about earlier, between the action you put into place versus what the metrics tell you. So if you see a change in metric, always try to find how it correlates back to what you changed. To me, that's the biggest part of the answer, because that will provide you context. It will give you much more insight in whether you're on the right path or not. So that would really be my answer to that question.
And then we have time for one more. So Brad, this will naturally go to you. As it relates to human performance, there's a variety of factors that I think will dictate how, on a human level, you can motivate agents to perform in the way you want, to perform in the best interest of customers. What do you see as the biggest determinant of that? You know, if you're really trying to communicate, here's our objective, here's what the agent needs to do to perform, how do you bridge that gap and put the agent on the path to actually achieve that performance?
I think the quickest way to that is to really just put it in a perspective of how it impacts the agent. And again, when we're talking about the contact center agent, you know, these are generally going to be fairly entry-level positions, so you're not going to be having people that are necessarily bought into your organization as a whole, as you might with, you know, your more senior, more tenured employees. So we have to overcome that by really tapping into the things that just drive people to perform in general, and that's really going to be, again, how does this affect me? And so by motivating agents and keeping agents motivated to perform, whether you can of course incentivize agents to do that, but what we found to be a lot more effective, as opposed to compensating agents for better performance and motivating them to improve, is just making their jobs more fun. And that's really what I think, where gamification I think has been huge for that. By driving this and just making their job more fun, they're more engaged, and they're actually working to improve the contact center, and they don't even know it. We've implemented a plan to improve our agents' customer service and improve our overall scores, but as far as the agent is concerned, it's a game that they're playing. And by basically taking them out of that equation and using motivational tools to drive your business objectives is the quickest way to success.
Well, Brad, Bill, and Stefan, I want to thank you so much for really a lot of illuminating points here, and I think that you all really attacked it from perspectives that were organic and true to the experiences you have, and I think that'll all resonate greatly with our audience here. I also want to thank the audience for so many great questions. We unfortunately didn't even get to scratch the surface of how many there were, but note that all of our speakers do receive a log of the questions that came through, and they'll be able to reach out to you personally with answers. If you don't want to wait for that, though, I recommend heading to our virtual exhibit hall right now. This is a networking break until our next session at 1:45. So take the time, download content, meet the solution providers, get to know companies like DATAMARK, Genesys, and Calabrio, learn what they're all about, and have them answer, I think, questions that can personally empower your contact centers, personally put you on the path to success. And also, we have a networking lounge where you can meet your fellow attendees and talk about pressing contact center topics. Take advantage of this 45, or right now about 40-minute networking break, and we'll be back at 1:45 with our employee engagement session. Sure to be an exciting one, sure to be one that I think speaks to a lot of what we talked about on this performance roundtable, the idea that when you connect with your employees, you keep them there, you get them engaged, you get them bought into your company culture, you're really going to see performance escalate, you're going to see customers happy, you're going to see your business happy, you're going to see success. But again, thank you so much to our roundtable speakers. Thanks for being part of Call Center Week Online. Networking break now, session at 1:45. Thanks a lot.